So, welcome to this session. We're going to discuss inclusive practices that can support family and community connections today. I'd love to know who I have in the audience today. It's a relatively small audience right now. Maybe more will join us, but if you could put your role in the chat, that would really help me out. Are you a building administrator? Are you a district leader? Are you a teacher leader? Are you an admin intern? Just starting this journey. Um, who do we have in our group today? Go ahead and put it in the chat. ESD coordinator. Ooh, science coordinator. Yay. Okay. Hello, John. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Lori. Nancy, CTE director. Many other hats, right? That's the one that's on your email signature. Perfect. Hello, Kathleen. Back for more, Kathleen. Back for more. Christina, hi. It's good to see you. Oh my goodness. Okay, so keep putting it in the chat, and I'm watching because it does help me kind of know who's in the audience today. So a little about me. My name is Galia Owl, and I'm the Inclusionary Practices Coordinator with ESD 112. So I work with building leaders to support the increase of inclusionary practices in their schools. I'm a recovering school psychologist, and I have absolutely loved that work, but I do believe that universal design is worth my focus and attention at this time. And I work as part of the Inclusionary Practices Project, which I'll tell you a little bit more about shortly. And as we move together in this learning, it's nice to know a little bit about your presenter because it's hard in this virtual format, for me to build a relationship with you or get to know you, especially since I can't even see you. But I can let you know a little bit about me. So I do look forward to getting to know a little bit more about all of you in our shared learning today. Like I said, I work for the Inclusionary Practices Project. Currently, Washington is one of the nation's least inclusive states, ranking at 44th out of 50 for inclusivity. And this information comes from a national report that's done each year, ranking states based on their LREs. And this was the data from 2018 when the grant that I work on was originally written and is the basis for the grant. Inclusion is the belief that it's the belief and the practice that everyone has the right to meaningfully access academic and social opportunities in general education settings. It's also a vision and a philosophy based on the fundamental belief that all people are capable, competent, and should be held to high expectations. And so our project seeks to address educational inequities experienced by students and families, supporting professional learning for school leadership teams that we can increase that inclusive environment using the lens of universal design for learning. So these are my objectives for you today. I really would like to broaden your ideas about how engagement with your school community can look. I also want to show you that the universal design for learning framework that we've heard about little by little, maybe you've heard more or less about it, maybe you've never heard about it at all. I'm going to introduce you to it today, that it can function to not only just support students, but it can also support our community and our staff. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to focus mostly on the community today. And I'm going to just give you as many resources as I possibly can today. I've tried to make them as organized for you as possible so it's not just random, so that you can go deeper in your learning in your area of interest. These objectives are important because data shows us that when we work with our community, this holds great promise of closing opportunity gaps for our students. And so we do need to work, we became educators to teach all kids, not just some kids. And the practices that we're going to talk about today will get us there. So now that you've heard the objectives, my objectives for you for this course, I'd like you to reflect on what you would like to learn today. And I would like you to set a learning goal for yourself. So I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute. And I want you to reflect on the following. What do you want to take away from this session? How do you think this work might impact you? And in what ways might it be difficult? So this is a quiet reflection time. This is not for sharing. So just take a minute, jot down your ideas. I'm going to give you 1 minute quietly to create your own learning goal for the day. All right, everyone. A minute goes by when you're thinking. It goes by really fast. So we're about to engage in some learning together, and so we want to prepare our brains for learning. And there are many ways to do this, but brain science tells us that when our brains are in a calm and relaxed state, information can more easily flow into our brains. And this is not only for students, this is for adults as well. And we all regulate ourselves differently and get ready for learning in ways that suit our own needs. So I would like us to take 3 minutes to do what you need to do to prepare yourself for learning right now so you can be the most engaged you can be. Do you have the water you need? Do you have something to write with? We just came back from lunch. Maybe you're running from another session. Maybe you need to kind of take a couple deep breaths. So I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes and I'm going to turn off my camera. I'm going to do what I need to do to prepare for learning. And if you would like to, please share what you do to get ready for learning in the chat so that others can learn from you. I'll see you in 3 minutes. All right. So we're going to come back together. And thank you for those who shared what you do. That was a good one about the camera. I do want to take quick screenshots every once in a while, like, ooh, that was really good. So that was a great ideas. Thank you for sharing. So universal design for learning and culturally responsive strategy is going over the vocabulary of a lesson before you begin so that you're not assuming knowledge or understanding on the part of your students, which is you in this case. You are my students. And so when I do professional development, I'm very transparent in the fact that I'm trying to model to you what we want our teachers to be doing for students, but also what we want our leaders to be doing for their staff when they do professional development. So equity and equality, these are words that are very important in this topic. When it comes to equity and equality in education, the terms are often used interchangeably, but understanding the distinction between the two is really essential for resolving issues faced by disadvantaged students in the classroom. So while working towards equity and equality, can both be good, equity really is an educator's end goal. And the reason lies between being fair versus being equal. So equality is more commonly associated with social issues, perhaps because more people know what it is. So in a nutshell, its definition is as it sounds, the state of being equal. When a group focuses on equality, everyone has the same rights, opportunities, and resources. Equality is beneficial, but it often doesn't address specific needs. So giving each student a laptop to take home, for example, would not address students who don't have internet in their houses. Even if a school is equal, some students still struggle. Whereas equity, on the other hand, provides people with resources that fit their circumstances. Schools that prioritize equity versus equality are more in tune with their students' needs and provide resources to overcome their specific challenges. So when we think about the community and families, we're thinking about family needs and challenges. And I read once that if we want equality, we need equity to get there. I think this picture helps make this point visually. If we want to have two of the beautiful neighborhoods, we need to have equity that shows that we do need some differentiation. Another concept that is important is the difference between inclusion and inclusive practice. These are often also used synonymously, but can be quite different. So if I invite all people into my classroom, regardless of their variability, I am being inclusive. But then if I deliver the same kind of one size fits all fashion, those people that I have invited into my classroom are going to be in trouble because there's going to be significant barriers for those people to overcome. And so inclusive practice addresses those barriers. So it does start with inclusion, having everyone present, physically present, but adaptations need to be proactively made to plan for the diversity and the variability that we can come to expect with any group of people without even knowing them first. So for example, we know that some people, students, adults alike, struggle with reading more than others, struggle with reading more than others. I don't know what happened to my closed captioning, but I'm going to put them back on. Oh, it signed me out. Great. I have to put in my password again. This is fun times. So if I right off the bat proactively know that there's going to be variable readers in my parents and in my students, I can already set up the scaffolds for that without having to then have someone fail first. So this for parents looks like when you're given something to fill out and you ask, would you like to do this as an interview or would you like to fill this out yourself? And not assuming literacy right off the bat. And having that be a part of, because inclusive practice is important because it really is an equity issue. It really is giving people what they need in that individual circumstance. And then we have intent versus impact. Sometimes we have the most incredible intentions, but our best intentions can have this negative impact on people. So we want to pay close attention to the possible impacts that we have on people and reflect on our actions to determine if that impact was negative. So just because you're a good person and you don't intend to cause harm, you can cause harm. And so it's important to pay attention. So for example, when you have dads with donuts with dad, so you're not seeing the slides that I'm on? Oh, okay. Make sure. Okay. So when we have donuts with dads, some of the, intended contact, what if somebody doesn't have a dad? What if somebody is gluten free and is like, well, there won't be anything for me to eat there? Just think about all of the things that could exclude someone from that, even though you're trying really hard to be inclusive. So when we do dads and donuts or, moms and muffins or mother-son dances or Christmas programs or things during the school day only, how can those things have impacts on families when we're not trying to negatively impact people? How can these create barriers for people? Because what we want to do is proactively reduce or eliminate the barriers for people to be able to access. So the question we leave ourselves with is, what options and choices would be necessary to ensure flexible pathways that would meet the needs of all of our families? Could we have families in fruit? Could we have, we welcome you to our school? Something that is, if you're on the receiving end of it, is going to make you feel like you're wanted there. Universal design for learning. You can literally get a PhD in universal design for learning. I learn about it all the time. I'm not going to, if you've never heard about it before in the past, I'm going to show you a way that you can catch yourself up on it if you're interested. But universal design for learning is a key tier 1 strategy to support the academic learning of our students. And this is the primary framework that our grant uses in the Inclusionary Practices Project. And the framework works to remove barriers to give everyone equal opportunities to succeed, improve and optimize teaching and learning based on science, brain science, and insights on how humans learn and intake information. So we've all experienced what's called universal design in terms of the physical structures, around us and technology. I mean, right now I'm using closed captioning. This is a universal design. This was originally created for people with disabilities, but anybody can utilize it now and it can meet their needs or preferences. But it's when we convert things to ensure accessibility for students, staff, and families, that's when universal design for learning comes into play. And when we're talking about accessibility in schools, what are we talking about? Accessibility to what? With universal design, it's ramps to be accessible to the building, automatic doors, those kinds of things that make physical accessibility possible, curb cuts. With universal design for learning, we're talking about being able to access the learning standard, what is actually being taught in the class, the information. So I'm going to give you a really quick rundown of how universal design for learning works. One is, I need to get your attention. So how am I going to get your attention? Whether it's a student's attention, whether it's a staff's attention, whether it's a family's attention. I need to have multiple means of engagement. Multiple ways that people can engage in my topic and I can get their attention. Then once I have someone's attention, great, I've given multiple options for them to engage. Now, how am I going to communicate with them once I have their attention? With the students, with the staff. Okay, the staff is engaged in my staff meeting now. Great, I've gotten them there. They're all there. They're all looking at me. Now, how am I going to communicate with them or the families? Great, they came to open house. Now, how am I going to interact? And that's where multiple means of representation comes in. Are you going to give them text-based, visual-based, hands-on? What are you going to do to represent the information? And then once you've given them the information, you've given it to them, they're engaged, you've given them all the information. Now, how can they show you that they were engaged? So this is a student. This is how can they show you what they know? This is a parent showing you how do you know that they were engaged in the first place, or a staff member that they actually took in what you gave them. And that's where you get multiple means of action and expression, where it's different ways that people can show you how they took in the information you gave them. So that's like the world's shortest, quickest universal design for learning overview. And so then I say, well, why do I need to learn this? Now that we have the vocabulary out of the way, why is it important to learn this? And it's important for our brains to know why we're learning something. So one, this is important for our students. Two, when we see relevance, our brains turn on and we lean into the learning. When we're interested, our brains turn on. And for those of you who are sitting in this, and you're like, yeah, lady, like I'm tuning you out, like I'm taking this because I have to, great, because you do have to. For leaders, this is AWSP Criterion 7. You are evaluated on this topic, engaging families and communities. So I'm really just trying to make you look good, is really what I'm trying to do, is help you do your job to the best you can possibly do it. Engaging families in their children's learning can have a powerful impact on student success, not in school, but throughout their life. However, to become engaged in ways that boost achievement, many families need information, they need encouragement, they need support from school staff and leaders. And this information that I'm showing you on this slide, this came from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Karen Mapp's research that she's been doing for decades about parent engagement and involvement in schools and in their child's education. And you can see that there are a lot of benefits when we have engaged parents. Um, Oftentimes what Karen Mapp talks about is that we know this information, we just don't know how. It's like, go collaborate, go partner. It's like, okay, great, how? And I think that's where we want to get to today. So, what do you think of in the chat? Go ahead, and what do you think of when you hear the term inclusive practices? Go ahead and let me know in the chat. What do you think when you hear this term, inclusive practices? What does that mean to you? So Ethan says strategies that can help all participants engage with learning. And that's great. Here are some examples of inclusive practices that we see in schools. There are many different types. Culturally responsive practices, that is an inclusive practice. Universal design for learning is an inclusive practice. All of these things are seen as inclusive practices. And so when we talk about in our thing, we want to increase the inclusive practices in a school system. We're talking about all of these kinds of things. MTSS is an inclusive practice, using data to inform your decisions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little activity. I'm going to put a link into the chat. It's a sorting activity. So I'm going to go to this page and I'm going to demonstrate it for you. I'm going to share my screen differently. I'm new to this, so I want to make sure that I am doing the right thing. Okay, so what you're going to do, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to kind of play around with this. One, you see the colored items here. So one will be a non-inclusive practice or an exclusionary practice. One will have inclusive practice, and one is I have questions about this. So I'd like you to go through by yourself. You all have different ones. They're not connected, so nobody's seeing what you're doing. And just go here, working to build an inclusive play space. Where does that fall? Inclusive? What about using the word should? Well, they should be able to do that. Okay, well, I have questions about that one. So I'm going to have you give 2 minutes to just sort these kind of family and community-based scenarios at the bottom into these categories. Okay. So you can take that activity if you want. You can use it, steal it, do what you want with it. So I want you to quietly reflect on your own personal experiences for 1 minute here. And pick one, or you can pick all of these to reflect on. What options do you provide families regarding their engagement? Do you intentionally plan engagement strategies for family? What do you hear and see that tells you that families are included or are engaged? And then finally, what would you do if a family was not engaged? So 1 minute for quiet reflection about your own experiences. So this is a really important takeaway, and a big part of universal design for learning is that while the way that families are expressing their engagement may change or look different, The overall goal does not change. The overall goal does not change. This is for our classroom teachers, this is for our students, and this is for our families. We maintain high expectations and goals that reflect what we want, but we allow for multiple ways to get to that goal. So the goal is, what's the goal here? The goal is for our children to be successful and for our families to be involved. And involvement can look different, right? It's like a GPS. We put in a destination, but I can do like avoid freeways or meander through the countryside or fastest route there or slowest route there or avoid traffic. But I'm still going to the same destination. It just might look different and we might be in different cars. So I want you to reflect one more time yourself. But put in the chat if you feel like it. Share with your colleagues. Picture at least one family that you know you had an impact on this last year. What did you do? What did you do that made it so you had an impact on that family? I'm going to put 1 minute on the timer, but could be quiet reflection or you can share with your colleagues. Okay. If you've ever been to any one of my presentations before, you know I love a good resource exploration section. So I'm going to orient you and give you a little quick tour of my reference library that I've made for you before I let you dig in. We're going to do about 10 minutes of resource exploration on your own. So I'm going to put a link into the chat for you. And I would love for all of you to join me at this link. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is the resource library. There's kind of two sections. One is guidance for leaders, this top part here, and one is ways to partner with your school community. So these are the resources for today that I'd like to give you 10 minutes to look at, and you're just going to go ahead and click on the underlined portion, and it should take you to the resource. So that's number one. And then for later, if your interest does get sparked, for example, about universal design for learning, you want to learn more, you can click here down below on universal design for learning resources. And this is a piece that I've curated for you where you can ask yourself, where am I at in regards to my learning journey for universal design for learning? And take some time to find where you are and dig in. So like, I learned by analogy. I need a basic overview. I need a reminder about what it is, but I'm ready for a little more information. So just find where you are in these yellow sections. I think I understand the basics, but I'd like to see it in action. Here's all the grades, videos from all the grades. And then here's, how can I use my knowledge of universal design for learning to plan PD for my staff? So this is kind of that next layer up. You know, you kind of learned it for the student portion. Now you're going to use it for staff. So this is something if you want to learn a little bit more about universal design for learning. This one here is a resource library about all types of inclusive practices. And there's a table of contents here. If you want to learn about mindset, you just click on mindset and it'll hop you right to all the resources on mindset. So enjoy. I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Take a break, get some water, go to the bathroom if you need to, but you know, watch a video, read an article, look at least one that you find interesting or relevant. See you in 10 minutes. Okay, everyone, welcome back. I wanted to point out that this is a universally designed activity. My goal is that you read some sort of guidance for leaders and some sort of way to partner with your school community. But it doesn't matter to me. I've curated these materials. It doesn't matter to me if you watch a video, read an article, go to a website that has, you know, resources. It doesn't matter to me as your teacher. All of these are acceptable. Maybe you want a webinar that's a little bit longer. Maybe you want a short video that's 3 minutes. That's okay with me. Okay. So I'd like you to pick one of these or all of them if you're, go-getter, feeling really go-getter today, and put it in the chat for your colleagues. So something that you heard or read, what's something you agree with from what you heard or read? What's something you want to argue with from what you heard or read? And what parts from what you heard or read do you want to act upon? So go ahead and just pick one of those to put in the chat. I'll give you about 1 minute to reflect, and then we'll go ahead and, as you're ready, put it in the chat for your colleagues to see. Kathleen's reflecting a little bit more on universal design in general, which is such a beautiful thing in the world around us and has made our world so much easier to navigate, more comfortable. Okay. So as you think of things, go ahead and put them in the chat. Yep, Susan, love it. Okay, so we're going to move to, so what can we do? So if we know that having engaged and involved families have such a positive impact on our students, then how come we're struggling to do this still? And typically it comes down to knowledge and capacity. I want to, but I don't know how to, or I need the environment to be set up for me to be successful. So I always think of this kind of like putting on a pair of glasses when you want to have a different perspective on a similar view. So to put this in practice, we're going to talk about steps that we can take. And it's okay to start small as you figure out what works for you and for your students and their families, because this is not going to happen overnight. It requires, a willingness to try, to learn, to be vulnerable, to be flexible with how you run your school, for you to reflect on things. It's important to point out, though, that community connections and family connections is not a program or a set of strategies that you're going to like pull off the shelf and go to like step 3. It's not going to look the same. There's no recipe that's like follow step 1, step 2, step 3, because your clientele is different. So in any given school or community. So knowing your school community is really important. So we're going to use data, we're going to use universal design for learning, we're going to be intentional about the environment, and we're going to support our staff in this work. So we're going to walk through. So using data is a first step that we want to do. And actually, Remy in the chat while we were when we were talking, he was looking for John Hattie's 25 Visible Learning. So anytime I ask myself, like something needs to be done, I find myself returning to this document over and over and over again when I'm starting out. So John Hattie's work provides a database foundation for improvement efforts. His team has compiled this list of 250 factors that affect student learning. And each of these factors are ranked based on their effect size. So that is how much a factor accelerates or impedes learning. So I'm going to put this link for you in the chat. And I'd like you to take 1 minute to look it over on your own computer, because it's really small. So you can, like it comes out really small. So you can zoom in yourself. Because if, we can't find an improvement effort that is grounded in research or evidence-based finding, then we're probably want to look at our priorities and what we're kind of investing our time and money into. So I want you to look at these and find some things that could support you with family and community connections. So for 1 minute, I'll put it on the clock. Look here. Can you find anything in here that is around family or community connections. And I'm going to take a look at the chat because I think there was a question in there. Okay. Lori, let me know about your question about data. If after this section, if I don't answer it, will you please let me know and I will touch base on it a little bit, but I think I'm going to touch on that. So she had a question about sharing data. Okay, so another use of data is demographic data, and this provides information about the characteristics of our students and their families. And so the purpose of this data is to ensure that the needs of all the types of students and families are being met adequately. And also we can indicate important demographic trends, like we have an increase this year of families who speak a primary language other than English in the home, or the last 3 years it's been steadily increasing. So that's going to lead you to maybe do something differently in your school or make some different decisions with that piece of data. These things can answer critical questions about the student population, such as like the ones listed here on this slide. So for example, student attendance data can become high quality actionable data when the school team, or the administrator or your data team is able to look at which students are coming to school each day, which students may be missing, and answer questions like, what are the instructional implications of this? What do we do to help families ensure that their child is getting to school? What are the barriers for them getting to school? Who needs assistance in getting to school? And with this high quality data in your hands, you can make an informed decision that can drive positive growth. But just just demographic data can really support your knowledge of trends of like who's coming to your school now. Racial, race and ethnicity, primary language, gender, economic status. Another piece of data is perception data. This data provides information on the attitudes and beliefs of your stakeholders, such as teachers, let's just be real, they're a huge stakeholder, students, but also parents and community members. And some categories for which perceptions can be really helpful include school leadership, quality of instruction, school climate. This kind of data, this perception data, is usually collected with surveys, but can also be collected in other ways. And in order to have a longitudinal piece of data or data that spans a long period of time and identifies trends over time, it can be helpful to create a good perception survey and stick to it year after year so that you can compare the information. Another factor that's important to remember when collecting this type of information is to use different methods of collecting the data to ensure that it's representative of your population, that it's inclusive. So this could include, for example, comfort with access to technology, primary language in the home. You don't want to just have an online Google Form survey, because what about the people that don't know how to use technology? What you don't want to have just an English one, because what if you have people that speak English in the home? So this also kind of looks at John's question, I think it was John, of how can you be, responsible for so many different needs when you have all these standards to meet. It's kind of thinking about all of the potential scenarios, as many as you can up front, before you get there. And then sharing this information out. So this kind of goes to Lori, sharing the information. What is the results of the perception surveys? How satisfied are your customers with your programs? What is that? And then when people look at that information together, there's a difference between private information, like keeping something private, and confidential. Confidential data, that's special education data, that's student names, that's kind of things. Those continue to keep, um, that confidential. But your iReady scores, like that stuff could be shared with the whole staff, and maybe it can be shared with parents and be shared with students. And another way to get data is to have feedback loops from all the different people in your system. Establishing clear loops for people to provide feedback around the school And this is an opportunity to provide a model for universal design for learning as you're the leader, because that's a big part of universal design is getting feedback from your students or your clientele or your staff or your families to be able to then improve your teaching or your service to that group. This is a great inclusionary practice, is getting feedback and then doing actionable items, listening to make them partners, and then acting upon uh, the things that we can act on. Here's another way to use data, Lori, that is like the difference between public pride is public displays of data. So having data walks um, where people can come and see things on the wall. You just put them up. You see, you don't have student names, you don't have that kind of stuff, and you just have people walk and notice and wonder and put stickers and, this is I agree or I have a question about, and you can have conversations about, visual forms of data that people might want to look at. Um, Actually, I'm going to go to this slide next. This one also, Lori, kind of falls into your question a little bit about sharing data. We want to make sure we share information about student progress with our families. And so we want to, this is very important to keep families in the know of how their student is doing and how, as well as how the entire school is progressing. So how do you communicate with families about how students progress is going beyond parent teacher conferences and report cards? How do you know that they're up to date? What opportunities do families have to learn about what typical development looks like, yeah, your kid's counting to 10, great. I don't know that at this time kids are counting to 300. That gives me a really big understanding of what you're telling me when you say my student counts to 10. What's typical development? Or your child is counting to 300, students at this time are counting to 50. um, how are strengths and weaknesses communicated? And then how do you report this to the community? Is there reader boards that say our iReady scores were, or telling the community what's going on in your school in terms of data? And then of course with data we want to, this is the OSPI, Office of System and School Improvement. This is OSSI's kind of plan, do, study, act circle of data, but this is a good method for any time we're using data, is we want to plan the purpose of using data. So we want to create a parent survey. Okay, great. What's the desired outcomes? We want to know how parents feel about fourth grade. I don't know. So then you kind of do it. You put it into practice, you put a survey out about fourth grade, and then you look at the results, you study it. And then you will act upon the results you got in one way or another, and you can adjust. Well, we want to tweak that question a little bit, or add a question about this, or I want to know a little bit more about that. So we adjusted, and then we planned again, we put it out, we did it. So you're constantly in that cycle of doing and adjusting, doing and adjusting, doing and adjusting, planning and adjusting. So I want you to quietly reflect on your own practices for 1 minute of how you're using data to support your efforts in family and community involvement. What are you doing in this regard? This is a quiet self-reflection for 1 minute. I was reading your comment, Kathleen, in the chat, and it's so true. We're going to talk about that. Supporting your staff in this work is so important, and giving them real time. When you make the time is so important in schools, right? When you allot time for something, people know that you're taking it really seriously. So that was using data. We're going to move on to using the Universal Design for Learning framework. And like I said, most of the time we're talking about it for students. but we can also talk about it for staff and how leaders interact with their staff in a universal design for learning manner so that they're modeling it, and also with our families. And so two of the biggest things that well, if three is, one is sticking to the goal, one is what is the goal? The goal is that we want families to help their students be successful. So there's two things. We want to address barriers and we want to address variability in our families. So one is addressing barriers and proactively thinking to reduce or eliminate them. And so these are some typical barriers to family collaboration, and Kathleen kind of even mentioned this in her last comment, is policies exist, but they're not actually enforced, or resources are not available to support implementation. Like, you have to contact parents X number of times. Well, I don't have time to do that. So then it's always going to be on my time. So nobody checks up on you. And then you don't have the time to do that, to support that implementation. So that's a barrier that we want to plan for. Sometimes we're reluctant to have families and decision making teams, like what point do we bring them in on? And these are some of the barriers that we want to break down and address in terms of our families. Some families and community members will participate more in their child's education than others. And what matters in an inclusive system of education is that their role is recognized and their views and opinions are valued and respected. So whatever you can contribute is valued and respected. And then there's looking at variability. So when you're looking at these three types of engagement, what ways can parents get involved? Is it only that they can be volunteers? Is it only that they can be on the PTA? Or is there, what are the ways that they actually can get involved? Are there different ways? And then how are you communicating information to parents? Is it only the newsletter? Is it only email? Is it only phone? Do they get to choose their best form of communication, how you communicate with them? Is it text message? And then how are you going to be sure you're being effective? You sending out all this stuff, and you're giving all these ideas, but then how are you going to know you're being effective? Just like with kids, you're sharing information, you're teaching, but how do you know now that they know what you've taught them and they've shown mastery? So thinking about different ways that people can get involved, and um, and having some people be in the driver's seat. Maybe you have a parent that can never come to an activity, but they want to help come, after school and file stuff for you. You never know, because that's their comfort level, or they're nervous about working with kids. And so they want to do something different. Um, there's other ways that they can get involved in other community events that are school based. Or maybe they can't come to school at all, but they want to do interactive homework with their child. And you facilitate that they're not just helping their child with their homework, but you have an actual thing that they can do together, and that's helping that student's education. So I want you to just quietly reflect to yourself, where are you at in your universal design for learning journey? It's just quiet reflection. Are you just starting out? Are you 5 years in? Where are you at in your universal design for learning journey? And once again, I'll point out the UDL resources. Find where you are. This is pretty much a landmark video for universal design for learning, this Todd Rose myth of average. It's 18 minutes long, but I 100% recommend it. I've seen it hundreds of times, and every time I see it, I still learn something. So we're going to talk about the environment. And what Karen Mapp says at the Harvard Graduate School of Education is she talks about linking everything to learning. If that's the goal, we want to just make sure everything is linked to learning. When parents are involved, how is that helping learning? How is that linked to learning? And how, how have you created this kind of culture of learning um, in your school? Creating an environment where the kind of social environment feels welcoming, they feel respected, trusted, heard, needed when they come in to the building. Just you can imagine the beautiful diversity in the parents that you serve. And then you got to consider your physical environment. Are your families represented visually throughout your school? Are there opportunities for them to see people who look like them, value the same things they value, and their identities woven into the fabric of your school community? Look at the walls, look at the books assigned to students. Consider the teachers in your buildings, the food served in your cafeterias, the music played in the hallways, the holidays that are honored, the achievements and values that are affirmed. Do they represent all the families that you have? What about physical supports, like color coding boundaries or, lines on the floor that tell you how to get to the office or how to get to, the cafeteria with pictures? Entryway, hall signs, good signage. Think of a garage sale that has good signage. How are people welcomed? When you walk in, is it sign in first? Now I talk to you, make sure you sign in. Or is it, hello, how are you? How are you doing today? So happy to see you, even if they've been in 10 times that day. What about the playground? What's your playground saying about your community and the inclusivity of your school? Can the community gather to use it on weekends? What about babies in strollers, grandparents in walkers, children who use wheels to access their environment, teenagers on skateboards? Is your school a gathering place? I saw Steve Marshall is on this, and we've been talking about a space that he has that he wants to create an inclusive play space for his community, and working with Harper's Playground, which is a nonprofit organization, to build an inclusive play space that's a nature space. That can bring people to your community and make them feel welcome. If you have one piece of play equipment that grandma can't watch you and take you to the park because they can't see where you're at, then it can be dangerous, and then they don't want to go to your park. How about this? I'm going to play this video of this teacher. It's a really quick 1-minute video. I hope that I can learn how to play it correctly. This is an activity that a teacher does. We're going to think about, what this says about the environment. Okay, I'm going to try to do it. Share audio. Let's see if I do this right.
Dear Reading in the Morning is something that happens every Monday and often Fridays. And dear means drop everything and read. Dear Reading in the Morning is something that happens every Monday and often Fridays. And dear means drop everything and read. I just always invite the families in to just read with the kids in the morning. The group of kids forms around them, and the kids are just like, oh, so engaged.
There is my secret hideaway.
Sometimes family members will come in and they'll read with totally different kids, not their own kid. Their kid will be off doing something else. I want my students to understand that their family is welcome here. They're not only an important part of them, they're an important part of our community.
Okay, I hope you could hear that video. I want you to quietly reflect, how is the physical environment in your school set up for family success and feelings of inclusivity? How does this teacher involve students in family reading time, even if their family members are not in the classroom? How does family reading time help to build community? And think about how this family reading time sets the tone for the rest of the day. Think for 1 minute. Reflect. Okay. So now we're going to move into talking about supporting your staff. Student achievement improves based on some research done by Harvard, 40 to 50% faster when there's consistent home and school communication. So when you're a leader and you're talking about regular family school communication, just like we had, one of our members in the chat, Kathleen, talking about how this needs to come down from the top, it's true, but having guidelines for your staff, what method of communication are you going to do? How often? With what information? Is your parent handbook up to date? I know some principals that set aside, you're going to spend this many hours per month on parent communication and you're going to be paid for it. And that's out of their school improvement funds. How are you going to structure parent phone calls so it's not just about a concern, that it's a positive call, but how are you going to structure the difference? How are you going to establish which mode of communication is best for the family? Let them choose. Another thing that Harvard School of Education, the Graduate School of Education, and Karen Mapp determined was that staff need to be trained on how to work with families. It's not just something that comes naturally all the time. And these are some of the possible topics. I wanted to say one quick thing about bias. There's some things about anti-bias and bias gets a bad rap, but my background as a school psychologist, I just want you to know that bias is 100% natural thing that our brains do to keep us safe. And so if you're human, you have bias. It's just making sure that you bring awareness to your biases and question them and bring them to the surface and then ask yourself why, because your brain can't stop doing it. There is no anti-bias. Your brain has to do it to keep you safe. It's evolutionary. But thinking about, okay, why did I get scared when that person walked by? Or what made me, nervous about this situation? Or what am I doing? Am I doing this because the student is Black? Like bringing it to the awareness to yourself to ask you, that's how we do it. So I just want to make a quick thing about bias. So what structures do you have in place to support your staff to engage in this work? With PD for them on a regular basis and time for them to actually engage in this work. Quietly reflect on these, on your practices and your experiences. Okay, so these are the steps that we've talked about today. And you have resource libraries to go back to look at all these different things. I want you to look back at your learning goal and revisit it and just see what you notice about the learning goal you made for yourself today. And while you're thinking about that and reflecting on your your learning for today, I want you to choose one of these reflection starters, either the sentence starter I used to think an hour and a half ago, and now I think, or what's one little nugget that you'll take away from our learning today, and go ahead and put that in the chat. Thank you so much for joining me today. I very much look forward to hearing your nugget. Oh, so glad you, Susan, that's, if you are going to relook at those libraries, that will make me the happiest person. You know, an hour and a half is not that long, but that will give you, you know, stuff to look at for a long time. So thank you all so much for wanting to learn more about. Oh, yay, Ethan. Yay, that makes me so happy. Kathleen's going to be looking more at the resource library. Great. That makes me really happy. There's a lot of stuff in there, and I didn't give you that much time to look at it, just at least to acquaint yourself. John, let's band together. You heard my message. You heard my message. Yeah, we want to you know, we model what we want, you know, for our staff to do. And so we can't ask them to do certain things with kids if we're not willing to do those things too. Share any of the things I gave you with anybody. Please contact me at any time if you need any other resources. My contact information is at the bottom of that resource library. Literally, please email me. Even if you're not in my region, I can hook you up with whoever the coordinator is in your region. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate all of you. And one day I hope to meet you for real.